Okay, so we'll go to VBA. I'm gonna post two links. I didn't want to, for this specifically this class, I didn't want to post anything online before I go over them with you. Now I can go over them, and then I'll put those websites up there so you can take a look at them. So VBA stands for Visual Basic for Applications. Visual Basic is one of the old, hard-to-kill programming languages. It's now, even though it changed a lot. You guys all heard of Java, C++, PHP, Python. And these are programming languages for computers, get compiled to execute, to perform certain functionality. And depends what's your need, what's your different structure, you pick which programming language you're gonna use. In many cases, you can use any of them you're familiar with to perform most common tasks. Some of them are dedicated for specific industry, specific field, like R and Python for like data analytics and so on. Visual Basic is more common. Visual Basic is for PC. Also, don't forget you have what's called platforms, operating systems. If you're creating Visual Basic program, it's not going to work easily on Mac or on Unix or on Linux or on mainframe. Most people know PC, which is the IBM compatible computers, which run mostly Windows, can run Unix, but Visual Basic is mainly for PC computers, mostly. Java is cross-platform. That's one of the big advantages of Java, especially in the financial field. If you're doing IT and finance, you see a lot of Java adoption there, because the client's computer is mostly PC or Windows, but the servers are not necessarily that. Servers could be Linux or Unix. They're not Windows servers. So they need a program that could run across platform. And a lot of companies, they use Linux, which is the free version of Unix. Some people don't want to pay Microsoft a penny for the operating system. And it's pretty popular in many fields. So you have the operating systems to consider. Now with the mobile devices, you have iPads, you have iOS, you have Androids. So if you're creating an app for iPad, you need to use Objective-C, which is Apple's version of the C language, which is the most common. So Visual Basic is derived from an old language called BASIC. And it's a little bit more human readable than other programming language back in the days like Fortran or COBOL or even C++ or even C. C and C++. It's a little bit more cryptic. So Visual Basic gained popularity among less experienced programmers. This is kind of the reputation. In the programming world, people look down a little bit on programmers who only know Visual Basic or Visual Basic.NET. This is not for pros. It's just like beginners to medium level because it's easy to get into. Which at the same time, one of its advantages, because now business users using Visual Basic, they can create really simple code that doesn't work without the need for a professional programmer, because it's easy, really easy to use. And it's a programming language. And it does a lot. So Microsoft Office, besides all the user interface using mouse and keyboard, you can customize and do custom work that you can have the application does stuff in an automated way or custom way, more than what it provides out of the box. And this is what made Excel as powerful as it is right now. You can create third parties, like the one you were talking about the decision tree, right? So you can create that actually right now. You can create in other languages work with Excel. You can create custom macros. Who haven't seen like a macro at work, like Excel sheets with like custom buttons and macros, dashboards? You haven't seen that. And who have not seen it? Okay. You others have seen like a custom, somebody built a nice Excel sheet at work with some built-in macros that does some work. So we're going to learn how to do that, or at least the concepts and basics behind that. But before we start with really Visual Basic itself as a Visual Basic, I want to talk a little bit about the concepts behind in terms of programming, some syntax terminologies to get used to that. So this website, Excel Functions, has actually a long tutorial about different types of topics from the very beginning to the advanced part. But what's common between Visual Basic and other programming languages is what we call variables and data types and constants. So the way every time, think about it if you want to compare it to what we do in Excel. And one thing, actually, I'm recording without sharing my screen, which was fine until now. Okay. So think about it in Excel as if you were you're selecting the type of your cell. Could be general, could be number, currency, date. Here the changes implies the format. You want to format this as a date, short date, long date, is a currency, is it scientific, means it has to be like too many decimal points, is a fraction format, or could simply, it's a text. You need to force it as a text. So data types are similar to that. In all programming languages, you're gonna come across this data type part. So when we declare a variable, when you work with variables, we'll get to that, you need to define this variable is going to hold a value. You need to specify the nature of that value. Is it going to be, we're not going to go through all those, just some of them. Is it going to be a whole number? If whole number means no decimal, then the type will be integer. Let's say if you want to use the value to hold the value of month. There's no 1.5 month. If the month is the number 1 to 12. So it has to be a whole number. Is it going to be decimal points? Then we're going to use double for that. If you're using any, let's say, tax calculation, financial values, any number you expect is going to have decimal points. Is it going to be a date? You can use a date type. Text in VBA language is string. String is a string of characters. That's what string stands for in VBA. In other languages, you're going to see similar naming to these. Data types, usually they don't map one-to-one between, let's say, VBA or VB or C++ or Java, but they're close enough. But it's the same concept. You have a data type for date, you have a data type for integers, you have data type for like small ints or long ints, and you have a data type for currency or long. One thing actually in VBA is the variant type. This is specific to VBA. If you're not sure what kind of value this variable will be, by default it's going to be variant. I don't advise you to use it for many reasons. We'll get to it later. Okay. So let's going to start with a quick example with VBA. Let me close this. So before we get to this one, okay. To open the VBA editor, the code editor in Excel, you need to have the developer tab up here. And by default, you won't have it. So you need to go to File, Options, and Customize Ribbon. And you need to check the developer tab in here. Then you get this developer tab, and the first button to the left is called Visual Basic. This will open a new window. We'll go over it a little bit, what this means. So this shows me, let me close this one and this one, go to this. So this shows me how many, on the left side you have the Project Explorer, see how many Excel files I have open. And in every file, first get a list of all sheets. For this one I have 4 sheets. Sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. So the first sheet ID is always going to be in this order, sheet 1, 2, 3, 4. What's between bracket is what you name it. And that you can change it. So whatever you name that sheet is going to show there. And then we have modules. We'll get to modules later. Okay. So this is the new sheet I created, even though here it says sheet 2. It's actually the 4th sheet I created. That's why the ID is sheet 4, if you notice. So this is sheet 4, but the ID is sheet 4. So if I rename this, call it test, it changes to test here. Okay.
Even though you created 4th, if you reorder them, do they change to sheet 1?
Doesn't matter. This is once you create a sheet, the ID is assigned.
Okay.
Doesn't matter how you move it. And that's for important reason is that anytime you need to access that sheet, doesn't matter where it's positioned. In the code, you need to reference to it. It's always sheet 4. So this is where the ID is fixed. It doesn't change. Depends if you rename it, it changes the position. Sheet 4 is sheet 4. You can delete it, create a new one. The new one will be sheet 5. That's it. Sheet 4 is gone. So there'll be no confusion. Actually, here you can test that right now. So if I delete this, create a new one. Now the new one named sheet 3 is sheet 5. So that's unique ID in that file. Okay. So these are the objects on my Excel sheet. We have worksheets and we have modules. We'll get to modules later. Okay. So in each sheet, let's say I'll double click it, the code is blank. So this is, I can start typing my code here. So I'll write a code that basically is going to put a value in the first cell in A1. I'll write it first, and then we'll go over it. Oh, this is a problem when you used to program in C# and you switch to VBA. So this is the declaration of a variable. We'll get to it. It's still the same concept from one language to another. The syntax changes a little bit.
Case important.
We'll get to that. So let's see what I did here. So there's a couple of things we need to go over. The first line, dim test val as integer. I'm recording this in video, you don't have to take a picture, but feel free. So I need to declare a variable that's going to hold integer numbers. You can name it whatever you want. In my case, I called it test val. Before I use that, I had to declare it. So the first part is the declaration of a variable. Dim is short for dimension, so I need to specify. This is actually a very old technical word. That means the system will allocate specific dimension in the memory for that variable. That's why it's called dim. And I specify it as integer. So the second part, I assign a value to that variable. Now that I declared it, I can use it.
What's test val?
Test val is the name of variable. It's a variable I created. I can call it anything I want. I can call it test variable. Test variable. Then I need to change it here. Then I assign a value, and then I need to put it in the cell. I need to specify which cell. So when I use the cells reference, it's going to ask me for the row and column. I said in row 1, column 1, which is A1, put the value, whatever the value of test variable. Here, because this cell expects the row index, the number of the row, and the column, not the name. There's another way to use A1.
What is
So
the thing
what's-
on the
yeah,
top,
what's the
media,
fill-
fill in one?
Then what is that?
That will, once we're done with this, now, get to that point right now. So in Excel, you cannot put, or actually in most languages, you cannot just put the free code. Let's say you have multiple things to do separately. You just don't put them one after the other. You need to enclose them in like separate boxes. And then every time you need to execute one, you specify which one. You know what? Call this subroutine, call this subroutine, or this function. So sub is short for subroutine, is a set of instructions that has a beginning and an end. So this specific code to fill A1 starts here and ends here. So if I have another one after, it doesn't keep going through everything else. So it separates your code per functionality.
So if you wrote fill A7 and then cells 1-1, it would still go.
No, here you can name it whatever you want. You can put like fill A100, still gonna reference.
Still gonna go to A1?
Correct, because this is what really matters here.
Is the fill essentially for you to be able to find it when you're coding? Is the fill A1, is that literally for you just to understand if you're looking for something and you have a whole lot? Like lines of code?
You can use that. We'll get when we get actually after the midterm. We'll get to the for loops. How you can specifically search for specific value through the code. How you can loop through all your set of data and check for a specific value or specific condition and act based on that. But this is just really very basic. So I created a procedure or a subroutine that's gonna declare a variable of type integer, assign a value to that variable, and put that value in the specific cell. Yes?
Is fill part of the VBA syntax?
No, this is, okay, fill A1, this variable, these are your own words, as long as they're not keywords. So when you create another sub or the subroutine, the name is basically to identify what it does for you to understand, and should be unique within the same file. So you cannot have another sub with the same name, because Excel, when you ask Excel to execute this, it needs to know which one. So the name has to be unique, and the variable has to be also unique within the same sub.
The open and close parentheses after fill A1, what purpose does it?
This is because you have the option to provide parameters, to pass parameters to the function. We're going to see that in the functions.
So right now you don't have any.
I don't have any. So what I did actually, the Excel has autocomplete. So I can do sub fill A1 and just hit enter automatically as that. I don't have to type everything. And if you notice, let me just delete this. I'll cut this so I can paste it. So as soon as I hit enter, you notice automatically it puts end sub for you. So if you forget to close it. And it puts the cursor right in between. This is where you type your code. So it automatically set the beginning and the end, and then I put my code back here. Yes?
The sub is like a function.
There's two types. So this is actually my next point. There was sub and functions in terms of these blocks of code. Could be sub in a function. I'll explain the difference in a minute. Okay? Yes?
Indentation is required.
Annotation is cosmetic, it's not required, but is for you is easier to read.
Is the same true? Is
Okay.
the same true with the extra spaces?
No, but I mean, you can have them first. Here's the thing: as long as you have every instruction on a separate line, it doesn't matter. The annotation doesn't really matter, as long as you don't have it like this. And as soon as you do something like this and you go to the next line, Excel is going to complain. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. So
It's not gonna work, right?
int, that's in C++ or Java or C Sharp. Yes.
So here you need to specify the.
Exactly. So the naming of these variables, of these data types is different, but the concept is the same. So if you guys use any, I mean, a lot of you guys do in QMM, right? So you're taking some kind of programming like Python or R. So you're gonna run into similar, you see some similarity instead of data types. I don't know, what do you call the text, the string in Python? Still string, okay.
And sub is like a definition, is the same concept, right?
Yeah, it's a sub. So we get a string, you have integer, double, I don't know if you have double float or decimal, this is the C or C++ presentation. So float in Python or C++ is actually, I think it's double in Excel, in VBA. But it's the same principle. Okay. So let's see how this executes. You can execute it from two different places. You can have the code open here, and you can hit run. You can click run here or here, run the sub or user form, or hit F5. This one way. The other way, from Excel, without opening the UI, you can click macros, and it will show you what subs are available. So there's, in sheet 5, there's fill A1. You can also click run from here. I clicked it, and it put 66 in the first cell. We can run it step by step. On the run, you can see actually, where's that toolbar? Under debug, we'll get into debug also later. There's a lot of stuff to learn here. We can do step into. Instead of 5, we do F4. So it will show us what's the execution point. Every F8, every time I hit F8, is going to move from one line to another. So it doesn't do it all one shot, shows me result. It's going to show it one by one. So test variable, as I declare it as integer, automatically the value will be 0 in it. So if I hit F8 again, now the value is 66. You need the value of that variable has changed. Meanwhile, cell 11, I don't know if this is going to work. It won't, but I can add it as watch. So cell 11 actually has nothing. Actually, I can put something here. So has a text value. Let me just go to the value option. So cell 11 has a value of our text is AA. So as soon as I haven't assigned the value 66 to it yet. So when I hit F8, execute this line, you see it on the left side, change to 66. And then end sub, and that's it, it ends. Now, the difference between sub and functions, we'll get to that in tutorial. You have two types here. You can specify function, let's say call it test function. The function has to be a type. The function returns the value as for the string. So the difference between sub and function. The sub executes certain set of commands and it ends. It doesn't return any specific value. A function, you can provide parameters, optional. It does specific calculations or process and has to return a value of a specific type. We're going to see an example in the other file.
Can we write one with the other? Can we call a...
You can call a function from a sub, but you cannot define it like this. Is that what you mean? No.
Could have done the first one like as function, as integer, right?
Say that again?
So how it says function as string, if we wanted to do what we just did, could you do function?
Yes, you can do as any type. Depends what the value will be returned.
We could do the same thing, like then put it cell like A1 and then get the.
Yes, but I'll show you a practical example how exactly to use a function. Okay?
So the only difference is that one returns and the other doesn't.
Correct. And the utilization is different. So in terms of the function, let's go to this example on taxation. So let's say we have a simple tax code for 15%. Here you can put a formula basically. You can say this is equal this times 0.15, right? This is your 15%. And you apply. Simple. But what if you expect this 15% to change every now and then? What are you going to do? Come back and apply all your formulas, change all the formulas? It's going to become painful because you need to know exactly where it is. If you miss one, then all your numbers will be wrong. So the best way to do it is to create a function that will give you that tax. So the function we will pass, what you'll do, we create a simple tax function. But you create you pass the amount, and we'll give you the tax amount in dollars. And you only specify the tax rate percentage here one time. So if you need to come back and change it later for whatever reason, you can change it here. Okay. And this is when you create a function like this, your own purpose. This is the name for that is user defined function. As opposed to built-in functions in Excel. So in Excel, when you call, for example, a function, let's say power of number to the power 2, this word power that takes parameter, this is a built-in function. Like all the functions we've used, like round, like length, trim, text, month, these are built-in functions. Just simply call them functions, but in Excel definition, these are called built-in functions. So they come with Excel. You can use function called, let's say, absolute value, ABS, of this number. If it's negative or positive, it gives you absolute value. So these are built-in functions. And we showed you before how you can get the whole list from here. This is all list of built-in functions in Excel. So these functions you provide, they accept input and will provide you a result, an output. So if you don't find the function that you need here built in, you can build your own for your own custom use. And the simplest one in this case is the simple tax. So we have a function created, simple tax. Let me go back to the code. Create a new module. Just look at this. So function, I named it simple tax. I make sure that this name here is not used by any built-in function. You cannot use the same function that's already used by Excel. So your name has to be unique. And takes input. So we provide the amount or the income, right, as an input. So that's how we define it. Simple tax, it takes an input, I call it income. Income is what? It's money, right? Cannot be date or tax type. Has to be a type of a number that take decimal points. So it cannot be integer. In Excel, it's going to be double. Remember that page I showed here? So double is the double precision floating point number and gives you the range. So you need a number that accepts, you need a data type that accepts numbers with decimal points, at least 2. So you can use double for that, or simply currency. Either one would work. Actually, currency is a variation of double. Double is the base one. So the input is double, and the output is what? It's tax. It's also double. And what do I do with the income? So it says simple tax, the output will equal to what? To the income times 0.15. So this function will take the input, which is income, multiplied by 0.15 and assign it to the name of the function, which means this is the return value. Now with this setup, I can use this function to calculate the tax. And if this rate changes, I can just simply come here, change this, and it will automatically apply all the, will update all the functions.
Do you need to define what is income?
Income is already defined here.
And how will it reference the set?
When we use it. So this is you specify in input. And here's the other thing. The difference, and keep that in mind, and remember that. The difference between function, or the best use, or the best practice use between functions and sub. Sub is specifically most times is related to a specific sheet. You'll be performing work on a specific sheet and you reference specific cells. Function is universal. You don't typically reference any cell or range in a function, so you can use it anywhere.
But how does it know what is the?
I'll show you in a minute.
Uh,
Yes, but in a function, you don't reference a specific cell or a range or a sheet. It's universal. It's just a box like this. You provide input, one or more inputs. It does some calculation or whatever you want it to do with these inputs and spits out one output. You could be like providing 2 or 3 values and it does some logic just to check if a condition is true or false. Like one condition we've seen before, if you have age and let's say high school grade, and you do your check there, could be nested if, and the result will be either valid or invalid. Could be Boolean, true or false, could be string, yes, no. But the output always one output. The function can accept multiple inputs and brings back one output.
my question was like, you said that sub is sheet specific, but can we? There are
You can put it in a module, but it doesn't matter. We'll get to that when we do it in the lab. You can put it either in the sheet, so it's not visible to the other sheets. We'll talk about scope soon, about the visibility.
So right now we are just compartmentalizing to one particular sheet if we want.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is how the, so if I want to bring, we can bring the function that back. So this is how a function works. It's literally this. You have one or more input. It does something with these inputs and gives you back one value. Okay? This is the concept behind it. And this is true not only VBA. This is in any programming language you're using. For any purpose. Any time you create a function, this is how function is designed. It's a specific set of calculations or process that has inputs, has output. And then you can use that somewhere else. So the way to use, once I create this, I'll go back to my Excel sheet and I specify, said, give me this simple tax. Now it expects input and the input is A2. Now the value of A2 will be passed to simple tax as income. Every time I call it. And I can simply just apply it. Okay.
If you have multiple inputs, do you have to
If you have multiple inputs, you have,
reference it in the same order?
yes,
The formula?
we'll see that in a minute. Uh-oh.
How did you run that? How did you reference it? I just saved it. It didn't.
You just save it, it should pop up. As soon as you type simple, it will see there. It will just pop up like a built-in function. Simple tax, click A2. Just let me get my charger. So let's say you have a more complex tax situation, which is like you need a bracket, which is typically the case in most situations. Oh, it's already running out of time. Fine, we'll do that next time. So I'm going to post this material. Please go over them before Wednesday.